Welcome to the Let's Talk Growth podcast, where we focus on the topics that can help companies unlock their growth potential. Now here's your host, Bill Hupp.
Hello again and welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Growth podcast. Joining me as always is my co-host, the founder and president of MarketWise Advising, Mr. Mike Haldane. Mike, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Bill.
Our guest today is Brad Boyer, a communications expert in corporate storytelling and the founder of Boyer Communications Group. Brad, thanks for taking some time to talk to us today.
Oh, this will be fun. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, Bill.
So let's start by having you tell us and the audience a little bit about yourself, including how you got started with Boyer Communications all those years ago.
Yes, all those years ago. I was a starving actor. I had done 10 years worth of professional acting work in New York City. And the joke I always tell people is they say, "Why'd you stop acting?" I said, "The paparazzi." They never showed up. So when I did not know this work existed, I had done other work to support myself as an actor, including focus group moderator, virtual focus groups. And I was looking around to see what I could do with my life after I stopped acting. And all of a sudden there's this job appeared. And I had never heard of anything like corporate training or teaching people how to do public speaking. I was always just been in showbiz. And as they say in Brooklyn, bada boom, bada bing, 3 decades later, I've been all over the world. I've had an amazing career, still do, and I'm very grateful for it. But so that's it in a nutshell. I'll try to stay brief with that.
Okay, well that's a pretty fascinating way to start. So sort of a means to an end, and then it, kind of took a turn from there. So how much did your acting background inform, the sort of communications expert that you've become today? And how long did it take you to feel comfortable or to feel confident in what you were doing?
It formed it a lot. In fact, I joined a training company and they asked me to sit in and watch one of their workshops. I was watching this poor person try to explain a very complicated, this was in the days of overheads and acetates. This is showing my age. And he had this really complicated, ugly thing up on the screen, and I was just an observer and a guest. And they said, "Brad, do you have anything to say?" I said, "Well, can I ask you a couple of questions?" "Yeah, go ahead." So I asked him a couple of questions, and then I said, "Oh, so you're trying to say," and I straightened his story out for him, and his jaw dropped. And I went, and lights went off in my head. I said, "Oh my goodness, my dad was wrong. There is life after acting." How to pull scripts apart, how to build a story structure, what people remember. I had written a show. I'd written 2 successful one-man shows for children. I toured with them. I've been pulling scripts apart, writing stories most of my life, and there it was. I suddenly realized that moment, that and the fact that I could train people how to get on stage and deal with stage fright and have the best of them show up because of all the years of acting exercises, etc. Those 2 things came together, and I went, wow, this is what I've been looking for. And it informed it a lot.
Yeah, just to add some perspective. So, the whole theme of telling a story and doing it, in presentation style and that sort of thing, it came to me, or the need for that came when I was newly with Intel. So this is back in the late 90s. And at the time, Intel did these training events for their channel. And so we would go on tour, and we would do typically 4 cities in a week, and we would do this for 3 weeks straight. And it was an all-day event. So this was a rigorous schedule, and you were in a different city, every night for 4 nights. And the first time that I did this, I had been with Intel for probably maybe just a few months, and they asked me to go on the road and to present this technical information to this technical audience, and I was comfortable with that part of it. It was the presenting part that I wasn't so comfortable with. I had done a little bit up to that point, but not a lot. And so I went on the road with a seasoned Intel. He was an engineer, and he and I and a few others, went up to Vancouver, British Columbia, and I got up on stage, and it was like an out of body experience. I mean, I knew that I was there and I knew that I was talking, but I had no idea what I was saying. And when I was done, I was dripping in sweat and was as nervous as I've ever been. And so, I gave it my best shot, but it was an okay performance, but it wasn't a great performance. And when I got back, my boss said, "Hey, a lot of Intel folks have gone through this program with Boyer Communications. It's called Presenting for Action. I think we probably ought to sign you up for that." So we did. And I have to say, it wasn't Brad, it was Terry, one of Brad's colleagues. But that week, to a very large extent, completely changed my perspective on getting up in front of an audience and presenting whatever the story might be. And I took that very seriously, and I practiced, and I kept doing these Intel sessions, and I got better and better and better. But it took me from the point of being completely petrified to be up on stage in front of 100, 200, 300, 400 people, to the point where I actually enjoyed it. So it was a life-changing event for me. And since that time, I have brought teams from, I had, future teams that I worked with at Intel that we brought into the Boyer program, and we did things that were along the lines of their standard workshop, but also things that were more custom than that. And then I brought them to 3M and Wolters Kluwer and CalSense. And so I've been a believer for many years, decades at this point. So I just wanted to make sure that there was a little bit of perspective, because I'm saying things that Brad probably won't say because he's a humble guy. But it's important context. It's been a big confidence booster for me personally and for the teams that I've worked with since that time. So Brad, with that, why don't you tell us a little bit more, going back, to the start, about what you would say the big need was for the types of services that you kind of talked about. You saw this guy present, and he really wasn't telling a cohesive story, and so that was kind of the genesis of it. But as you think about all the corporate customers that you've had all over the world, what has the big need been?
It kind of falls into two camps. One, people used to do training because it was an important need to groom people and reward them and bring them into the fold and all that good stuff. So we used to do lots of, that's why we were hired. My two first clients when I went out on my own that I worked with was Intel and Frito-Lay. And Frito-Lay, Pepsi, for example, as a culture, if you didn't present well, you did not get promoted. And I used to be brought in to help people get to the next level in their career if they were stumbling in the communication piece, because it mattered. It mattered a lot. You go to Silicon Valley, and that's not what they care about. They were engineer based, but they did care about what I started to call early on in my career infobesity, because they had incredible amounts of technical information, and everybody knew they were suffering and boring when they were delivering that stuff. And when I came into Intel and I showed them how to take anything and make it interesting and turn it into a story without making it dumbed down, that was the other reason I was hired. So part of it was career-based. The other part was we really need to explain things clearly and briefly, and we're just not doing that. And so those were the two worlds that kept, and they're still alive. They're still alive, but it's changed. But those two drivers are still there. This person needs to get to the next level, or we have something really important we're trying to make clear, and we just keep failing at it. So there's the two drivers. Does that answer your question?
And so you mentioned change. So how has it changed over time?
People have less time to learn things. We used to do 3 days of very intense work with video cameras and getting people up on their feet, if you can remember. And I have all these amazing real life acting exercises that deal with the things you talked about there, Mike. And we put that into the workshop, plus the training. I had some training for 4 years with a Gestalt therapy camp. I was really interested in helping people through their defenses. And it takes time to do that. And 3 days wasn't long enough. And now people don't want that. They almost want a flu shot. Give me an injection and I'll be better. And COVID had something to do with that, where we went deeply into virtual, which I was an expert at. Virtual made us even more isolated and kind of, I don't know what to say, in need of short little bursts of training and then back to work. So it's changed in that way. The investment of time, money is one thing, but time has become very scarce. And then there's also something else I've noticed, especially with sales forces. They're isolated. People used to work in an office together and share things and be able to talk to each other. And now, very often, I'm dealing with people who are in home offices, and there's no main office, and there's no support system for reinforcing what they've learned. They're in there, they're doing things by themselves, and that's also been a lot more than it was before. So that's what I'm seeing. When we put our system into a team, we try very much to encourage them and teach them how to work with each other, just to rehearse with each other, to call each other up and talk through stuff. And people do that in our workshops now, and they go, "Oh my God, this really helps." I go, "Yeah, this is what human beings used to do." And I have them do it with a pencil too. I take away their computers.
Yeah.
So that's what I've seen: infobesity, isolation, and just a sense of, no sense of bonding with the team. So
Yeah.
that answers your question.
So it sounds like the information and the training that you're offering is still being delivered. It's just that some of it is remote, some of it is maybe it's divided up so that it's not 3 days in a row or
Yes,
anything
that's
like that.
exactly that's exactly
And
right.
it's more virtual and so forth,
Yes,
right? Yeah.
I've installed parts of it in virtual that you can do, and in respect to the people, the time that people don't have. But I'm so glad we're back to where I just came back from doing one where I had a team together for 2 intense days. We can actually be together face to face again, because this kind of training is tribal. This work I do started in caves around a campfire. I'm not joking. And I have a funny story I tell about the first business presentation, cave painting on a wall. But I'm serious. It's a joke. It's funny, but it's serious, because there is a hormonal it's been measured bonding experience that happens when people declare things in a group in person around, a meeting. And so that's a long-winded answer, but that's what I've seen change. And I think we're getting back to where we're doing that again, which is great because it's needed.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think everybody is a little bit starved for those in-person interactions, and especially around a campfire. That seems to have special meaning for a lot of people. That the mystique of fire is still very much present in the human spirit. Yeah, in fact, I remember it was about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. I had you out to work with the CalSense team, and the comments that I got back after that week, we did 3 days with you and then 2 days with another trainer that was more about strategic selling and that sort of thing. But the comments that I got back were that was the best, and these were seasoned people in this room to a large extent, but that it was the best week of training they've ever experienced in their entire career. So kudos to you for that, because you were a huge part of it.
Thank you.
So what I wanted to jump to next then is a little bit more about the types of clients, or the brands that you've served over the years. You mentioned Intel and Frito-Lay, and to some extent, I think by extension, Pepsi. But you've done business all over the world. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Frito-Lay, I love that company. The people there are just the most, they are driven, and they are smart, and they are practical. And I worked with the marketing department for years there. And then Intel, you get, sometimes I thought I was working with the cast of The Big Bang Theory, but it's also very driven, smart people who go other places. So I started in the world of, I was there at the birth of Silicon Valley in a way. But technology and consumer packaged goods, people go other places. So I started at Frito-Lay and Pepsi, and since then, from just working with people who remember me, uh, if you name a consumer packaged goods company that comes to your mind, I'm 9 times out of 10, I'll say, yeah, I've done work with them, and not a little bit.
Yeah.
And then technology, Intel was all over, it was global. Frito Pepsi was global. Some of the other places, Kraft, which became then Mondelez and Zurich, I've been there. But we went all over the world because of the satellite nature. It became globalization had just started, and people heard about us, and from headquarters or from whatever, and they'd say, "Hey, can this guy come over there?" And we'd said, "Yeah, sure." So that's how it happened.
Yeah.
And if it's a global company, if they had branches in other parts of the world, we ended up there. And I sent some of my people. I didn't want to do it. We even went to Siberia. I didn't go. I sent 2 of my trainers over a period of time to Novosibirsk in Siberia, where there's a fabulous bunch of engineering facilities, and Intel was there because it's a hub of engineering for, in those days, a peaceful Russia. Wouldn't go there now, but no, we've been to Siberia. I mean, so if you do well at the headquarters, you end up spreading out around the planet. At least you
Yeah.
did in the past.
And has that been your recipe for growth? It's all been word of mouth, like you're describing?
Yep. I've never advertised. I've just kept my word.
Yeah.
And if we ever did something that didn't work, we said, you don't have to pay us. I mean, I just always did that. I
Yeah.
learned early. First, I wanted to be the best at what we did. And I just turned out that I had an instinct for it and a bunch of training that all coalesced into this job I do, which is more like I love doing it. And people noticed.
Yeah.
And so that's how we spread. I would do sales calls, of course. I mean, I learned to sell, which was really a shock to me. Because when I was an actor, if you were a salesperson, you were, Willy Loman. But I learned that it was one of the most amazing professions in that you have to be a therapist, a problem solver, a consultant, and listen like crazy. And when I learned to do that well, it was like, wow. And I believed in what we were doing. So I would do the sales calls. We'd get a client. And next thing you know, that client would spread out to other clients because people would leave and go someplace else. So
Yeah.
that's kind of been my story.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great story. So you talked a little bit about what you learned. What were some of the other key learnings that you had along the way?
I think I could get a degree in marketing just based on all the presentations I've fixed for marketing people. I've been thinking about, maybe I should just, those universities that count life experience as a degree, between Frito-Lay and Pepsi, and amazing marketers, and then Intel marketing department and Kraft. We're part of the Kraft at Marketing Academy, and so I I could do that. I mean, I learned a lot about marketing. Anyway, in the formal sense, I learned a lot of jargon. My first workshop at Intel, the third workshop when they were really starting to use me, I had this gentleman in Silicon Valley in Californian language says, "Dude, great workshop." And I said, "Well, thank you." He goes, "But dude, you got to learn to speak TLA." I said, "What's TLA?" He said, 3-letter acronym. And I said, "You have a 3-letter acronym for a 3-letter acronym?" Yeah. And he gave me a dictionary, Mike. He handed me this I'll never forget, a little purple book. It was pretty thick, small, and it was filled with all their TLAs and FLAs, 4-letter acronyms. And then the same thing happened at Pepsi a few weeks later. I went, "Oh, this is ridiculous. This is crazy." So I've learned about marketing. I've learned a lot about how things really get decided. And I don't know, there's just a lot I've learned by working with people. I'm always amazed. I always have the joy for me is to be able to get the best thing about the human being, to show up on purpose, to show them their strength when they're presenting. I don't do cookie cutter. I don't do formulas. It's like I call it the 2% change, the little change that would make the biggest difference in how they are as a person in front of other people. And it's something they already are. They're just blocking usually because they're scared. But I've learned those things over and over again, and it's always a delight to see that happen, to help somebody get free. That's been a great learning. Yeah. So I don't know. I could just go on and forever about what I've learned. How to do visuals. I've fixed more visuals than I think anybody else in the world, and I do it the right way. Most people don't. Writing TED Talks. I've not TED, but TEDx Talks. I've done about 40 of those, and I do it for free because of what I learn and the people I meet, because they're fascinating.
Yeah.
And smart. And I meet people like you, and who know what they're doing. And I learn about technology that's fascinating. I thought your last thing was phenomenal. The last job you did. Intel, my God, all the things I learned about. I helped USB get launched with all the presentations. I helped with that. So I just always learning. And that's another part of this wonderful thing I get to do.
Brad, it must give you an immense amount of gratification when you see people, the light click on for them, right? Like the light bulb go off. And because you do a multi-day, week-long camp, you must see the growth that people have even from day to day in terms of their confidence and their ability.
I've seen it all. I've seen amazing things happen because people were ready to do it, and with a little help. Yes, that is the best part. Now, I don't get that as much as I used to because, again, we can't do 3 days. Or maybe I should start a camp, Bill. I think that's a wonderful word. Let's see if anybody would. I think I could do an executive retreat for 4 or 5 days, and I've got someone I work with who does that, and brilliant man in Switzerland who has a thing called high performance leadership. He does that for 5 days, and people spend a lot of money and go to Switzerland and all that. But yes, it happens, and I've seen the change, and I see people come out of themselves. Or there's been a couple of times I've had more than twice, people who are absolutely phobic, who literally can't stand up to introduce themselves, so they start shaking and crying. And that's rare, but they're there, and I help them. And then at the end, they're still shaking, but the audience stands on their feet and gives them a thunderous round of applause because in the workshop, because they did it. And it's not slick, but it's totally believable and makes people want to take action, which is my philosophy. The whole thing's about getting people to take action. You're not there to inform people. You're there to make a connection, build trust, and help them take action. So I've seen that. I've seen it a lot. And you're right. That is the joy. Yeah.
So in your experience over these many years, what are some of the challenges that people and companies face as it relates to communications? And are those challenges universal, or have they changed over time depending on cultural influences and whatnot?
The thing I see consistently and still see that I'm actually making some headway with is what I've called infobesity. When you have a marketing department, under certain circumstances, I've seen it in most big companies, a presentation about a product launch, for example, will spend 3 or 4 months going in circles around every department, and everybody feels the need to put their 2 cents in. And what comes out is a 65-page deck presentation, for those who don't use the word deck, that is almost impossible to deliver because it's so dense. It's taken hundreds of person hours to put it together, and by the time it's used in the room, it's almost worthless. I started seeing that at some of the big consumer packaged good companies, and it bothered me because they would send their people to fix this guy's presentation and fix him. And I looked at what he was given, and I used to make, ex-actor, I'd say, guys, one of the compliments we used to give people is that Daniel Day-Lewis, he could deliver the phone book, and I'd watch. And I'd say, they're giving you a phone book, and you ain't Daniel Day-Lewis. So that's still there. There's reasons for it. I started to try to do my best to reduce those reasons, and I found out it's about the human brain. It's about who we are as a species that infobesity is caused. And that is, we don't want to look stupid in front of the tribe. When in doubt, we'll add more data. And I started to see the parallel between food and information, which is when we had not a lot of food, we didn't have any problems with diabetes and overweightness. We were too busy gathering food. When abundance was created, like say from agriculture, when a lot of problems showed up. So abundance and not knowing how to deal with the nature of information, that's what I see. And it's still there, and I'm starting to make some headway with it, because you have to solve it from the top down and come up with conscious policies that restrict in a intelligent way, not rule-based, not rules, but using the principles of how the brain works and storytelling and all that. If your team incorporates those into your policies and the leaders stick to it, you won't see all that. And one of the things I tell leaders is, the less trust there is in an organization, the more pages I will see, and there'll be more stuff on those pages.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on this. You've touched on this in a few different ways, but the next question was going to be, is it mostly a presentation problem, a written communication problem, or both? But really, it sounds like an information overload problem, and
Yes.
people having a difficult time deciding, because I think people's natural instinct is to include everything.
Yes.
And it's so hard to edit yourself and to cull things down
Yes.
to what is really critical for them to know.
Yes.
And it's really important to do that because of time and attention span, but also because, yeah, you really want people to sort of take away the most important things.
Exactly. And if the culture is a gotcha culture, which means you stand up to present and it's like a hostile press conference, you are going to come back with more pages. And that drives a lot of this. It's a waste of time. I've seen one marketing department in 1 month use 1,000 hours of person's times just to get ready for the presentation to the senior level people. It's crazy. So that's it. You're right. It's a part of the human nature to want to look good, be smart, and that's not why you're presenting. That becomes the motive, and it's unconscious, and then it's exacerbated by leadership that doesn't protect people when they're presenting from being attacked or being interrupted, or all those things that make people feel like they've got to look smarter and prove how smart they are on every page. Also, there's a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of speaking versus documents. I see it everywhere. Documentation versus presentation. Philosophically, that not being understood, and emotionally being put on the spot and feeling like you're in danger, will drive a lot of what we're just talking about.
The actual workshop itself that you do is called Presenting
for
for Action, right? And so could you tell, for those who haven't taken the workshop, can you just kind of explain what it's about, how it's structured, and why you've decided to structure it in that way to increase its efficacy?
How I do our work now, and I have people I work with when I need it, but mostly I like doing it myself because it's great joy. I get the top. I will not do a workshop for middle people that have been told to go to a workshop and to be fixed. That just doesn't work anymore. I don't do that. If you want to work, I come to you at the top level. I have to get to there. Anybody who can interrupt the story creation process and doesn't understand what I'm trying to do with their people, I have to include them so that the radical way I do things isn't interrupted and destroyed. And that's what I kept finding at places like the big places, doesn't matter who it is. So we go to a team-based approach, and we take the top of the team, we work with them in advance, we understand the stories they're trying to build. I help them build a classic, what's called screenplay structure. I borrowed a lot from screenplay structure from action adventure films, because the nature of business communication, always, 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 no exceptions, is that there's supposed to be an action at the end of what you're doing, whether it's an email, a document, or a presentation. And that's a mental shift. That's hard. And I have to have the senior level people understand that. So I work with them in advance. I help them build structures for the stories that they use the most, and we send those out to the people and have them build a real presentation that they're going to use in the real world, because I don't do made up stuff. I want this stuff to be, payback. Then we tend to do virtual meetings to get everybody working that system, because they're cost effective. The good thing about virtual is they're very cost effective. People are all over the world. They can come in for 90 minutes, do something, go away, come back, do 90 minutes, and we can get a lot done. And then we meet face to face so we can work on the individual and refine the stories and get them ready to go out in the world. And that's what we do. Now, in that process of getting a real story built and ready to go out in the world and to be used, people learn the skills and they learn what they need to do as an individual. We record them still. They use their own phones so they can take them home and show the kids. But that's what we're doing now. And I'm finding that by starting in advance with the senior leadership and getting them to understand why we're doing what we're doing and how different it is, and how you get to concise and clear and short isn't by tricks or PowerPoint training. It's by a philosophical shift called, every time you stand up, you're a leader. Every time you write a document, it's leadership, and you are trying to raise trust so someone will take action. And we start with that from the day one, and we just keep doing that all the way through. And it brings the leadership out in people. And it also gets their story short, powerful, and clear, no matter what level of complicated technology they're talking about or issue. Like, I work with a lot of market research companies. I work with PhD level chemical engineers at certain famous chemical companies. Everything's done that way so that the system is protected, that the stories get short, they're all action driven, and the human being gets the feedback they need to know what their strengths are and how to make that story work. So pre-work, discovery, build some classic structures for people to use over and over again that work, just like Jason Bourne movies are the same movie as Indiana Jones, but it's all, the content's a little different. Then we get them in a room and finish the visuals, do everything. It's from blank page to taking the stage, we do it all.
So we know what the purpose of your workshop is and what people think they're going to get out of it going into it. But what are the unexpected things that you think people get out of your workshop?
Well, they have a wonderful experience with my incredible sense of humor, and they have a good time.
I'll vouch for that.
I always tell people before we start, if you want to have a good time in this workshop, lower your comedy standards. And we have a good time. We laugh. That's one of the feedback I got a few weeks ago. Is the guys, similar to what Mike said. He said, I've been in sales for top 3 decades. This is one of the best trainings, and I had we laughed a lot. That's unusual, right? So we have a good time. But what happens to groups, because we critique each other and they kind of get naked in front of each other, not literally, HR, calm down, is they bond. There's a bonding that happens when everybody is doing the same difficult kind of embarrassing things in front of each other to get past their fears. You can't play safe and get past your fear. You've got to do risky things. I make it fun to do that. And you see people come to life after they've yelled and screamed and make themselves look like an idiot in front of everybody, and they laugh, and it's like boot camp. They start to bond. And I get people hire me for that a lot. They realize that. I've had people over the years say, I've got a new team. I want you to do this with them. I also learned that what we do, because to do a story that builds trust is to demand honesty. I had an engineer at one of my Silicon Valley clients call what we do a forcing function. I said, what's a forcing function? He said, if you want to know if a system has integrity, you pump energy into it. It either hums or blows up. He goes, yours forces people to tell the truth about things. And then what's happened with that is that what gets exposed is that the sales strategy or the marketing strategy has got a hole in it. Because I'll say, so what are you going to tell the customer if they ask this? I don't know. We haven't decided. Oh, okay. So it's like it forces clarity and honesty to build trust, force up through the system, strategy, execution, all the things that aren't working will appear, and they have to get fixed. And I've had that happen a lot. When I work with a lot of senior level people building keynote addresses, and that happens a lot with them. I'll say, so what are you trying to make happen here? Well, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's not really clear. What specifically do you really want to have happen here? Yeah. And they have to think about it, like, okay, great. And we start building the story, and the light, you can see the lights go off in their head when they just do it in pencil. I go, oh my God. I've had people say, you know what? I shouldn't be doing this presentation right now. Okay. How'd you learn that? Well, when you asked me the question about da-da-da-da, right? I've had other people say, I shouldn't be doing this. Somebody else should be doing it. I've had people say, oh, wow, you're right. I need to call the hotel and reset the room. I don't want 250 people sitting the way they were. We need to sit them this way. So truth and an honorable story. Stories have a life of their own. I help people find it. It's reality. It forces clarity. Clarity forces behavior change. That's the other part that I really enjoy, because it's a detective game. What's this situation? What specifically is you're trying to make happen? Let's build your story towards that, using the structure from Hollywood and Shakespeare that's worked for centuries. And all of a sudden, things start to get really clear for the person who's actually delivering it. And I've helped, on more than one occasion, I've helped set policy for a major corporation because the CEO is doing a keynote address and he hadn't thought through why he was there.
Brad, when presenting, what do most people get wrong before your workshop?
I'll tell you, this is 1, 2, and 3, the same thing. They don't understand what their job is when they're presenting to people or writing to people. They think it is to inform them and to do it in a way that's neutral. I don't have a plan this, it's not my job. I'm going to send them everything and let them make a decision. From that, you get infobesity and you don't get leadership. Communication in business is always, 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 no exceptions, a moment of leadership, and you're always there to raise trust to get people to take action. And people go crazy when I show them that. They get afraid because that means you have to be responsible. So some people come in not wanting to be that. They just want to do their analytical work and just pass it on. And then they want to know, but how do I make my presentations brief? People are complaining to me that it's 65 pages and I don't know. I say, because philosophically, you're not doing the right thing here. Your job is to provoke a decision. Yes, but it's not my job. Yes, it is. You know what the people at the top tell me all the time about people presenting to them? I wish they'd tell me what they want me to do. So the nature of business itself, I've been trained philosophically to the rational world of Aristotle. There is a specific nature to everything, and the nature of business communication is action based on trust. And action is a measurable behavior, not a alignment or a buy-in and all that stuff. So that's what people walk in the door with sometimes, this mental set of I'm just a cog in a wheel and I'm passing on the data. And that's the surprise and it takes a few days for them to get out of that. That's a place of default. I don't want to be caught being a leader. I don't want to be caught not knowing what I'm doing. So I'm just going to do that and just do what they tell me. That doesn't last long with me. So I had a standing offer when people say, yes, but what about this kind of presentation? Listen, we could go through the list of every kind of presentation there is in the world, but here's what I'm going to do with you. And yeah, there's no action in this one. Take a moment. If you can bring me a presentation or a communication in business that inherently has no action in it, by its nature has no action in it, I will pay you $1,000. But if I find the action, you will pay me $1,000. So what do you want to do? And they'll get, well, and I had one guy almost win. One guy, he was a PhD guy. He goes, retirement dinner speech. Oh, close. I said, oh, very close. And the answer was, listen, that's entertainment. That's not a business function, but there's an action in it if you want to play with it, because he had to give one. But I've never had anybody win that.
What was the action within it?
Come up and learn from this man what he did from his career, because then if you focus on his qualities and how he learned things and all that, and you put that into the presentation, it is in fact not a business presentation. It's an entertainment moment. It really is. Some of the worst presentations people remember are like best man speeches at a wedding, where the guy totally embarrasses himself and the groom and everybody. It's like that world. But you can have people emulate what the man has done. They can learn from it.
Yep.
And you can put that into a behavior. Tomorrow, here's what Bill used to do and make himself so successful. Here's what you can do to live in his memory, pass it on, blah, blah, blah. You could do that. And that would focus the information. The reason you have an action is to focus everything you're talking about, because without that, by the nature of information, there's no place to stop. You can just keep putting more stuff in. So anyway, There it is.
Yep. Makes sense. So, Brad, let's shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more. You mentioned the pandemic. What has the impact been, in your view, on communication from the pandemic?
I'm not a sociologist or an expert on that exactly, but what I've witnessed personally is isolation. It's not been healthy. I think people are really just intuitively waking up to that now, and you don't know what you've missed until you go back to what you were doing. And doing everything virtually was sad.
Yeah.
And I used to joke, I tell people it's like kissing through a shower curtain. Yeah, the action's there, but it doesn't have the same whatsoever. And the distraction. We live in the most distracted work environment in human history. That's been studied. I joined an organization called the Information Overload Organization a while ago, started by a brilliant man I met at Intel. One of the things they studied was how often we are interrupted in the workplace when there was offices. Every 3 minutes, a minor interruption is going to pull somebody's attention away from what they're doing. Every 11 minutes, a major interruption. And the problem with that is it screws the human brain up. It takes 40% more time to come back to a task and get reoriented. And by the time you're back into it, you're getting interrupted again. And interruptions include emails popping up and bings and bongs and buzzes and, hey, what I call prairie dogs coming over the top of your cubicle saying, hey, what are you doing for lunch? Those things. We thought that when we work from home, people thought, oh, I'm not going to be interrupted. I'll get a lot done. No. You had two worlds colliding, and it became just as bad. I think what that did to communication was made it kind of fractionated. And email overload is huge still, where people are sending everything by email or text. And it's kind of cut the guts out.
So which components of change that happened during the pandemic do you think have stuck even post-pandemic?
I used to say even before the pandemic that virtual meetings have a wonderful place in communication. They are in fact the meetings you couldn't have had if you didn't have virtual. So that's going to stay. It's not necessarily pandemic related, but the use of video. Well, it is. This meeting, Teams, Zoom.
Yep.
the ability, because of our friends at Intel who double the microchip power every 18 months, we've got microchips that can do great video stuff. I mean, 10 years ago, you didn't have great video between people. Now we do. That's going to stay. And that's good, because it's better to see a face than just hear a voice if you're trying to build a trust. And the virtual online training exploded because it had to.
Yeah.
And I think AI is going to be a great benefit to training. I think the virtual world is going to make training really interesting. And I think the pandemic accelerated that, just like it accelerated self-checkout lines.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for, I did a keynote. I wrote one for a share group about immersive trainings. And some of the phenomenal technology that people wear now that tell them things that would have taken 25 iterations of a PowerPoint presentation to try to pass on.
Yeah.
And I think all of that just accelerated because we had to do it alone. So that's going to stick around. The technology piece is going to stick around. I hope we get back to more and more being in a room together, really talking with each other, doing the tribal stuff that's humans, that will always be humans, because that bonds and makes it all worth it. Part of a team, common purpose, feeling that on a visceral level is not a small thing. It's not a luxury. As companies grow, the tendency towards infobesity gets worse. And if you're a leader, growing a company, there's Metcalfe's law. Remember that from Intel? For every node you add in a network, it doubles the traffic by 50% or something. It's just amazing. You have to bake in from the beginning a conscious information policy on how people are going to put things together, talk to each other, cut off email at certain times at night. All of that has to be done because information will swamp you the bigger you get, and your decision cycles will slow down. And I saw that over and over again. You can't grow immersed in all this gobbledygook communication, iterations. It's just not, it eventually stops things from happening.
Yeah.
And that's a big mega statement, but it's true.
Yeah, it's a really interesting parallel that you've drawn between culture and trust and how that impacts the amount of information that's brought to a presentation or that's communicated in other ways. I'd never thought about things that way, but what you say makes perfect sense. And I think you're right. People are trying to cover themselves with as much information as possible so that they aren't caught off guard or embarrassed or whatever the case may be. And that's all a function of trust and the culture.
Yes. Yep. Remember Intel? Rat hole, rat hole, rat hole.
Yeah,
People yell
right.
rat hole. Yeah. Boy, that's really fun to present into.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah,
Anyway.
It was a great training ground for sure.
Oh, God. Combat presenting. Oh, we should just do an episode of this, guys, called Brad's War Stories about the goofy things he's seen in the field, because, boy.
Yeah, we could spend another hour easily talking to you, Brad, but we know you got to go. So we'll end it right here. But thanks again for coming on and sharing your insights.
Thank you. This is fun.
Experience. It was a terrific conversation, and we really appreciate it.
All right, you too, guys.
That was Brad Boyer, executive communications expert, corporate storyteller, and the founder of the Boyer Communications Group. Mike, thanks for joining and helping steer the conversation with Brad. It was a really good one and a really fun chat with a guy who has really seen it all over the years.
Yeah, totally agree. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Let's Talk Growth. If you enjoyed it, feel free to rate and review the podcast. You can get new episodes and listen to old ones by visiting marketwiseadvising.com/podcasts. Let's Talk Growth is owned, produced, and published by MarketWise Advising, LLC.